This week on the Powell Not Found podcast, we're talking about the debut of the new Office series, The Paper, that is streaming on Peacock, the long-awaited sequel to The Office. Let's go. Let's take it away. Here we go.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl who loves gin. A national pandemic seized her birthday celebration. Although she knew it was coming, we tried not to tell her. She brewed some Irish breakfast tea. She knew her birthday was getting corona.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Powell Not Found podcast here for the week of September 9th, 2025. I am your host, Mark Powell, as always, every single episode here. We are back. We are back after a little bit of a hiatus. Life gets busy. Things happen. Episodes don't get made. Baseball games get played. TV series get watched. But alas, I'm back. Let me actually turn down this. Just make sure I'm not blowing you guys away here with the sound. Yeah, things happen, and we missed a couple weeks, but we're back right before I go on a little bit of a vacation myself. And I want to talk about one thing and one thing only. And a lot of people would say, "Oh, we're going to talk about the Yankees being doing pretty well in this 12-game gauntlet that they had." Or in the midst of the 12-game gauntlet that they had, and taking two out of three from both the Houston Astros and the Toronto Blue Jays, something that I honestly, when I was talking about it the last time on the last episode, wouldn't have bet a lot of money on these games that the Yankees were going to fare well, but they sit two back in back of the Blue Jays for the AL East now. And they played really well. They played fantastically well, which really set the tenor for the week that I had, because it couldn't have been better timing. Because when your baseball team wins, when you're feeling good and you're feeling on a roll and you're watching good baseball, albeit a little bit messy, but when you're watching good baseball, you want to watch something that's going to be in the same vein. And it's September 4th. I nearly forgot about it because they had pimped the trailer for the new show, The Paper, earlier this month. But it dropped on September 4th on Peacock. And it is the Office sequel that people have been clamoring for years. It's been nearly 10 years, I think over 10 years, 12 years, since The Office finally said goodbye, and we had to say goodbye to those iconic characters, Jim, Pam, obviously Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, left earlier, but we had to say goodbye to that show a long, long time ago. And for years, I feel like the audience has been wanting some sort of reboot, reunion, something in vain of the Ricky Gervais Office, the British Office, that had Christmas specials that would kind of bring them back together. And for the most part, outside of a little bit of a COVID get-together that John Krasinski put together during the height of COVID in 2020 on his personal YouTube channel, we haven't gotten that. The Office has remained one of the most iconic shows in television history, and still there was no follow-up to it. There was no real plans for it. Until very recently. There were podcasts. I mean, Angela and Pam have a viewing podcast of The Office that was very, very popular. I think Brian Bumgarner, who plays Kevin in the old series, has a podcast as well, rewatching and talking about the series and how they made the series. But no follow-up. No follow-up until now. 2025, The Paper, produced by Greg Daniels, which that's a very, very important point to make. Greg Daniels was also producing the old Office, so you have that direct lineage to the old show there. Premiered on September 4th, and they dropped 10 episodes about a new premise and set several years after the original Office had shuttered. And it is the same documentary crew covering a new beat, and what they're covering is a the Toledo Truth Teller. This is a Toledo, Ohio. This is a local paper, and they discover this kind of organically after going back to Dunder Mifflin in the very first episode. The very first episode, you were presented with Dunder Mifflin, and in a very documentary-like form, they find an organic way. They find their way to this Toledo Truth Teller using some of the, let's say, the old resources of the old show, and they find themselves documenting this new crew. I have to say, right off the bat, I think the trepidation that comes with rebooting an iconic show has to be really frightening. The original Office ran for 9 seasons. The original British Office, I believe, had 2 seasons and 2 Christmas specials. I could be wrong about that. And they are both lauded for what they accomplished at the time, and also they're very different shows in the same right, even though they're covering the same bases. Ricky Gervais's British Office is a little bit more dour and a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic. It's of its time, but it's not for the faint of heart, I guess you would say. And the American Office had moments where I feel like they really purposely tried to humanize some of these characters to be more culturally sensitive as well, because if they did a one-for-one British remake, I don't know if it would go over too well with the American audience. And so you can literally see that shift in the first season of the American Office when they're doing the Ricky Gervais British Office beat for beat in the pilot episode. But anyway, going back to the point is launching something like this has to be really scary, because there's so many expectations that come with something like this, right? Are you going to tread the same ground? Is it going to feel the same? There have been a lot of documentary shows since this show. I mean, Parks and Rec is the comparison that I think everyone's making. That was the other show that would follow The Office and followed the format of The Office in a very similar way, but kind of expanded it in a new and different direction. You had shows like Community or shows like even Brooklyn Nine-Nine that weren't exactly a documentary, but they were shot similarly in that handheld kind of run-and-gun style, whip pan format that I feel like we became accustomed to seeing with shows like The Office. And so personally, knowing that this show was on the horizon, I felt like I was echoing a lot of the same sentiments that a lot of people were feeling. And Greg Daniels even touched on this in some interview. I have no idea where it's sourced from, but he said this. He's like, this show is really for those fans, those Office fans that think like, oh, you can't ruin The Office. The Office is perfect as it is. Because personally, like, they've done it. They did it, right? Anything that would come after this would feel like it's treading new ground. And it's interesting that this show starts off the way it does, because it addresses that right off the bat. And it kind of tricks the viewer into thinking that they are going to tread the same ground, that they are going to be a facsimile of something that we've seen 20 years ago. That we're introduced to Ken Davies, who is the kind of boss in charge of the toilet paper section of the company, and he's going around the office very similarly to how Michael Scott goes around the office in season 1, episode 1 of The American Office, and he's introducing you to and setting the contextual scene for the viewer of what you're walking into and what the documentary crew is walking into. And he comes in and he makes off-color jokes, and all of a sudden you start feeling like you're watching Ricky Gervais in a different form 20 years later, the same thing. And in that moment, I would say as a viewer, I'm like, this show is going to bomb. But what it does is that it gives you that taste of, hey, this is Ricky Gervais. This is what you watch. This is what you're familiar with. And they flip it on its head immediately by introducing who really is the star of the show, which is Domhnall Gleeson's, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, Domhnall Domhnall Gleeson. That's what I'm going to go with until corrected. And his character Ned Sampson comes in as the editor-in-chief, and he's a little bit smarter than some of the previous Office stars. Ricky Gervais obviously was a narcissist, right? Michael Scott was a narcissist that kind of grew into a more humanized version of himself over the 7 seasons that he was involved in the show. And that is not the case with Domhnall Gleeson's character, Ned Sampson. He's a little bit smarter, has tendencies to be a little bit gullible in the show, but he's definitely a man with a mission, and he's completely new to this environment, right? Which is something that The Office hasn't seen. Every single time that we are introduced to, every time, each iteration of The Office, when we're introduced to the characters, the scene that you're walking into is an extremely lived-in set. And what I mean by that is that the boss has been in place for a while. The characters know what you're in for. Really, the newbies here are the documentary crew that are adjusting to what they're capturing. In this case, it's a little bit the opposite. The documentary crew is new, but they're coming at a time when Ned Sampson is new. So along with the documentary crew, you also have a main character going through the motions of trying to figure out who's with them, who's against them, right? And that's a little bit more of a refreshing twist, because along with the viewer, now the main character is going through the same journey that you are, right? Which is a little bit of a different turn that this show showcases, which I think makes it feel differently. Also, I think Parks and Rec, too, before it, had proven that you don't have to have like a dumb manager character be the lead of this documentary to make things interesting. Amy Poehler, again, forgive me, I'm reaching back in my memory bank to remember the first season of Parks and Rec, because I feel like I haven't watched it since the first season. But Amy Poehler's character in Parks and Rec was dumber in the first season, and I feel like she got smarter. She was written smarter, and they kind of changed the character. In fact, they kind of changed that whole show when Adam Scott joined or Rob Lowe joined. It felt like a reboot of that series, because it did feel like a retread of The Office when it first started. But I think what Parks and Rec proved, and I think what The Office proved later on in different seasons is that you don't need, as long as you have compelling characters and compelling relationships, you don't need someone like a Homer Simpson at the top of it for it to survive. We saw that definitely, even though they're not as lauded as the old show in season 8 and season 9, but when Steve Carell left, you saw different dynamics at the top of that show, whether it was James Spader or whether it was the woman who played Nellie. She's a British comedian, and I cannot remember her name. When she was at the top, Dwight and Jim really took the mantle of that show and kind of led it into John Krasinski and Rainn Wilson took it, and they led it into they created that show, and it was more of an ensemble as opposed to having one main star. So in that way, it's really refreshing. It's really refreshing to see someone who's not like a complete retread of what we've seen before. One of the other things that really stuck out to me was how much I missed this show and how much I missed this format. I was introduced to The Office late. It was 2005, I think, that when The Office premiered, the American Office premiered. And I don't think I really came to the show until 2009, 2010. So I had a lot of catching up to do. And I did a lot of that not only in syndication, watching on television, but Netflix was loading seasons on, or I would borrow DVDs. I think that's how I watched the first episode. I would borrow the season 1 DVD that either my family had or one of my friends had, and I would watch the shows, and then I would rent the episodes on physical DVDs. An era that is completely gone. like good luck finding a DVD player now. It's like going back to someone and being like, well, as long as you still have your old VCR player, well, I can give you the show, but it will be on Betamax. It was a different time, right? Then Netflix kind of accented that until I was kind of caught up with the seasons, and by the time they were ending the show, I was kind of watching alongside of them, and I remember feeling kind of like, I don't want to say goodbye to these characters. I missed the format, which is just proof that everything old is new again. Because at the time, there were so many shows that were like this, that were aping it. It set off The Office, Parks and Rec, Community, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. There were so many shows that if it wasn't a mockumentary, it was supposed to look like that show. And I remember when The Office ended and when Parks and Rec ended as well, there was a fatigue of mockumentary everything. And this is so it is so funny to see that format come back and feel like, for me as the viewer, I was coming home. Like, oh, this is, I missed this so much. The show does such a good job with allusions to The Office as well. So if you've watched this show and you're hoping to have them call back things or talk about the old show, they're going to do it. And they're going to do it in a very respectful way that doesn't necessarily step on the new cast's attempt to reboot something, right? You're still seeing elements of the same thing in place. Like we talked about before, you're still seeing that Ricky Gervais character who's a side character, which is an allusion to the old show. Oscar has some of the old, I saw that on social media, Oscar has an old, the doll that Michael gave him on his desk. There's calls that certain characters make to other people that are direct allusions, and they just tread that balance so nicely. They really direct the show, and I don't want to say feed the viewer, but they give the viewer enough to chew on. They make you point at the screen and go, hey, I know what they're talking about. Because if you're a fan of the old show. If you haven't watched the old show, it's important to note, you don't need to watch the old Office complete, season 1 to 9. You don't need to take that 34-hour trek in order to watch the show. They do a good job setting the new viewer into characters that, hey, you're living with these people. Now, does it help to watch the old show? For sure, because you're going to get a lot of the illusions, just like this one that's being shown on screen of Oscar just having a terrible time, realizing that the documentary crew is back. It's going to help. I mean, Mare, who I think is played by Chelsea, I want to get her name right. Let's see, I've got the cast up here. Chelsea Frey plays Mare, who's basically like the intrepid reporter alongside Ned Sampson. She is Jim. She does a great job portraying that normal character. She's probably a little bit quirkier than Jim, but the straight face to camera shots, the being aware of the moment and being aware of the camera crew is still there. And that's where, we said earlier, Greg Daniels, who produced the old show, is involved as the executive producer here. That's where that connection and that DNA of making it feel the same is really important, because you have the same person who helped produce the original one here with us, leading these guys along in the proper way, right? I'm sure some of the direction of her character came from the fact that the other people saying, no, we want you to be this person. We want you to be the stand-in for the Jim character, who was always breaking the fourth wall and relating with the audience. So that's why I think that's important. If this was rebooted by somebody else other than the people who were involved with the show, I think we wouldn't think of it as closely aligned. I think we would feel the separation of this reboot in the way that we felt the separation when things like How I Met Your Father, right? It was an example where it didn't feel close enough to the original. It was a facsimile of it, but it didn't feel like it was really a direct continuation. And they tried in that show. I watched the first season of it. I know in the second season of it, there's a lot of cameos of the old cast, but it just didn't work out, right? This does not feel that way. It really feels like you're put into a new world and a relatable one at that, and also still respecting the older material, if that makes any kind of sense. There are the cast of characters are great. The performances are great. I kind of love the fact that they're in another dying business. And that's where I'm really curious when finally they release this on DVD. It's like, of course, there's a couple collections I have in my house, right? I should get this out here. One of them is obviously Zelda stuff. I love Zelda as a young kid, so I try to collect all the games, right? The other thing is The Office. I have the British Office in DVD, the American Office on DVD, and I can't wait to hear if they put this out on DVD. Again, an antiquated delivery system, but if they do, I'd be really curious to see how they ended up at this idea. Because when you're introduced to the American Office, right, it's a paper company going into a digital world. In this particular situation, you have a newspaper heading into a world where news is under attack every day. Fake news, not real. Also, not to mention, it's a print newspaper, right? That has been long gone. And that's holding on. I mean, look around you, and if you can find a local newspaper that's still thriving in this day and age. I remember one 10 years ago where I used to live, and that was still kind of going, and I think that's gone now. How many still exist? So we're still in that predicament here where you have someone trying to revive something that is just past its time. And working alongside and trying to find budget, and it's so past its prime that it's nestled within this company that owns a toilet paper company as well, because that's how far down the drain, excuse the pun, that the business of print journalism has gone, right? So that's really, really interesting that they still continue to kind of identify. And that's what I would want to hear in the DVD commentary of like, how did they get to this kind of business, right? Obviously, it was about paper, and then it's about the newspaper. What I think is interesting about this show, what I think that the show might resonate, let me start again. The show might resonate with more people this time around, because it's not about The Office itself, if that makes any sense. The Office would turn some viewers off because it would remind them of their own office, right? I think the fact that it's in a newspaper as opposed to just paper sales and, accounting and all that kind of stuff, which it does have those elements of it. It was so much about the relationship of people within the office themselves that I think some people would actually be turned off by watching it, because when you come back home from work, the last thing you really want to watch is a satire of work, because it puts you back into the grind again, right? It's not some people, and I'm saying some people do not like the escapism of the old original Office that I think might not be here as much in the paper because of what they do. The show still is based on the relationship between people, right? The only reason this show is interesting is because it looks and examines relationships within the office itself. But the fact that they're doing journalism and they're going out and trying to find stories, I think adds a little bit of comedic value in the way that Parks and Recs did. Parks and Rec. I can't even say that show. Parks and Rec. There we go. Whoa. All right, take another drink of tea here. And reboot. I think this show will resonate in the way that Parks and Rec did, because it was about them, but it wasn't completely about The Office in the way that The Office kind of nestled you back into a very familiar setting that a lot of people are used to, unfortunately, in society, which is a cube farm and a gray beige office that they go to every single day. I think in that way, this show will shine. This show is 10 episodes. It has amazing highlights. Journalism, season 1, episode 6 is one of the funnier episodes that I've watched in a long time. It made me feel like, oh, The Office is back. This is a perfect lunacy that happens, and they do a great job of treading this line and making things get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually you're at a breaking point. I kind of love that episode. The show does sometimes lose the thread a little bit. Ned Sampson's character goes in and out, and it is hard to gauge just how stupid Ned Sampson is, because there are moments where he has amazing clarity and he seems like he's very on the ball. He seems like he's, like I said before, a man on a mission looking to improve a local paper. And then there are moments where he just seems to lose it for the sake of the joke. Season 1, episode 7, I Love You, is probably a low light. It tends to jump the shark there. And of 10 episodes, it's the only time where I felt like this is a little bit much. And to be fair, there were definitely moments like that in The Office. The Office was, 24 episodes a season or something like that, outside of season 1, which was season 7. So they had plenty of misses as well. It's just surprising because it left me wondering, like, how smart is this person, right? Which is something that I might be biased about, because we've seen The Office so many times. It's a bingeable show. I've seen The Office so many times that their characters seem so well defined, and maybe they're still trying to feel out where Ned Sampson is, like a la Homer Simpson in the first couple seasons of The Simpsons was smarter than season 9, season 10, season 11, and subsequent seasons of The Simpsons, where he completely jumped the shark. Famously, everybody talks about, I think the writers talked about, there's literally an episode that Homer's brain just announces that he's leaving. I think they talked about that in the Conan's Serious Jibber Jabber with the Simpsons writers, which, if you haven't watched that, that's a very, very good, like, pre-Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, Conan O'Brien podcast that around 2010 that they did, talking about the evolution of the show. So maybe that's just it, right? Maybe the show needs a little bit more time and security to kind of fall into these characters, right? And also, they don't know what resonates, right? Like, to me, I think the fact that he is slightly smarter than the average bear is the appeal of the show. When he completely loses the thread, it feels like it's a little bit of a circus, but maybe they're waiting to see what actually resonates with the viewer. So to that end, that was the lowest point I think I felt with the show. I should also add, I watched the show in 2 days. That is another thing that I wish it's already been renewed for season 2. I don't know whether that's 10 episodes. I still couldn't find whether it was 10 episodes or more of an extension. It's one of the things I missed about the old show while watching this new show. It's so fast. 30 minutes goes so quickly now against a backdrop of modern television, which every episode is 60 to 63 minutes. So it felt like I watched the sequel to The Office in such a short period of time. And that's my own fault for binging it. but wanting to get my ideas down on paper and on the podcast and on the show, I felt like I needed to watch it. And in a way, I know you can rewatch it and see more clues. In fact, I rewatched the first couple episodes again, and you still jokes come in and out. The jokes are so fast and snappy that you will see things the second time, just like if you rewatch a movie or something like that. Like there are such sneaky little jokes in there, including one when Ned is looking at some of the papers of past and showing the staff. There are just such sharp jokes in the midst of that it just went too quickly. And it made me hearken back to, I wish this came out episodically, the way that the old show did. Because there was something nice about talking to people about the episode of the week, right? What happened? It also made, and maybe this is just a complete abstention of realizing that maybe this was not happening at the time, right? But I think the relationships, because the old Office was 24 episodes long and they were 24 minutes apiece, right? Which I believe is like 3 more hours than what this show is if you add it up, made some of the relationships feel more earned. Right off the bat in this show, we are kind of presented with a relationship to be a Jim and Pam situation from the first get-go. And I don't know whether that's a reflection of whether the writers want something to happen faster or whether the medium of television, it just had to happen that way because there wasn't enough time to get the ball rolling with the show. Does that make any sense? It just felt like the relationship between Ned and Mare was getting pushed along and with way more inertia than it needed to have, right? I felt like they could have slowed that down and really given the viewer something to want in season 2. And I guess that may be, and you'll see it in there's a whole dynamic between season, from episode 1 to episode 10, where there is a resolution, right? And I feel like that's just so quick for The Office, for an Office-like show. But is that to pander to the viewer, whose attention span is a little bit shorter nowadays, with everything else around them to watch? Or is that something that they did on purpose, knowing that, like, hey, we've got more time to flesh things out? So that was one of the things I felt like maybe it was a criticism of the show. The emotional beats just seemed a little bit rushed. Esmeralda, who's played by Sabrina Impacciatori. Hopefully I'm saying that right. She really does blur the line between character and caricature in this show. You don't know why to root for her in the beginning. She does such a good job being that heel in the beginning of the show. And like The Office, you realize that there are motives behind all these characters, and they get a little bit more tolerable as the show goes on. But again, it's a little bit much, right? And and without a lot of the knowledge in the beginning, you're like, this seems a little bit over the top. I'm just looking at my notes here. The characters do seem to switch on a dime emotionally, and Nicole and Dietrich, their relationship, which is also very front and center in the very, very beginning, things evolve and then things disappear, and it feels less like The Office there and more like a cartoon. And I use The Simpsons as the comparison because The Simpsons, something crazy can happen to them each week. And again, they're already back in the house like nothing's happened. And that there are elements of the paper that do that, where they evolve some of the characters and things transpire between the characters, and then they don't feel the same. So hopefully in season 2, this gets fleshed out a little bit. It was just something that kind of was very, very present to me while watching this show that I thought was a little bit jarring. But other than that, the show is a really fun watch, and it's goofy, and it's needed. We said a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that The Naked Gun was a refreshing change of pace from the movies we're watching, because we live in a tough time, right? We need these shows to exist. And The Office and The Paper, I got to get used to that. The Paper delivers there. It is a fun watch. I wish it was more, to be honest. And that's always a good thing when talking about media that you're consuming, that you want more, that you're not left feeling like it's a drag. I feel like for Office fans, though, knowing how bingeable The Office is, and having been in the shoes of somebody on the couch looking at the television and wanting and then getting prompted by Netflix to say, would you like to watch the next episode? Of course I want to watch the next episode. It's The Office. To have 10 episodes come out all at the same time, it feels like a flash in the pan. And I didn't want the experience to end that quickly. So next fall can't come soon enough for me. I hope that there's more episodes commissioned. I hope that we explore more of this world. It's a very interesting and dynamic world. It's funny. The cast is great. They grow on you each episode as it goes on. There's a going back to the original show, there is a Stanley-esque character in there. Oscar Martinez, who I haven't mentioned this whole time, serves as the thread between the old show and the new show, but he does so in a very evolved way. Like, he's not Oscar from The Office. He is Oscar who's grown and has been through The Office, the experience of The Office. And having him there as an ancillary character to this show anchors it a little bit. And if you've watched the next show, there are just so many subtle jokes there that, like, you just enjoy, right? It keeps you in that moment. And so that was a really, really smart move to have him be at this involved in this show. And it's let's put it this way. Fans of this show have wanted closure for years of what happens to these characters after they're gone. We should have a movie to find out what Michael and Holly are doing. Seeing Oscar in this newspaper is the closure that everyone was asking for. Seeing him in a new experience, in a new setting, right? We're not going to see Jim and Pam in Austin. We're not going to see Michael and Holly in Colorado. We're not going to see Daryl in New York at Athlete. We see Oscar here, and that is the evolution. That is the answer that the show has come up with to give fans that through line between the two documentaries. And it's done really well. And he's different. He's a different man, as everybody is. 30 years, 25 years after when things change, you're a different person and you're a different character. And that's what's so interesting about his performance, is because it's him, but it's clearly the character 25 years in the future trying to do something else and having some of the same traits, like not standing up to authority, which is very, very present in this show, but an evolved perspective in the in this particular documentary or iteration of the show. I just thought it was very, very interesting to have him be the connecting thread. And when we leave him in The Office, I believe he's running for a senatorial seat, a state senatorial seat. So it makes sense, because I think a lot of the other threads have been closed, and that one was probably the easiest one to reopen, if you will. So I'm excited for the DVD commentary. So hopefully there is a DVD that comes out, because I will buy it. Just putting that out there. Anyways, with that, it's a very long review episode of The Paper. But if you love The Office, go watch this series on Peacock. It debuted September 4th. It is a great cast, amazing performances, subtle jokes. The writing is impeccable in this show, which is what you expect from an Office sequel. And for all you guys clamoring for a Office movie, well, they did you one better. They gave you a new series that's probably going to go on to have its own legs, to have its own identity. And they did it respectfully without treading the same ground. It's an accomplishment. So go watch The Paper. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up the show. This week, I will be on vacation once again. We'll try to get an episode in when we can. But for now, this is the Powell Not Found podcast. I am your host, Mark Powell, signing out for episode 73. The Paper is very good. Go watch it. Go watch it. What are you doing? You're wasting time. Go watch it. Bye.